All right, so this is the first presentation for Unit 3. In Unit 3, we're going to go over the United States and Canada. I remember you will have a map quiz with this unit, so along with vocab and short answer, you'll also need to know all of the U.S. states and Canadian provinces and territories. So first off, that's obviously a map of the United States, so again, you'll need to know all your states, where they are for this as well. Of course, make sure you pay attention to the states over here in the Northeast. To practice for the map quiz, you can download an app called Tap Quiz. It's TAP, Tap Quiz. Or you can also go to lizardpoint.com. There's other websites too. If you just type in like online map games, map quiz games, stuff like that. They're all over the place. All right, so first off, just a little quick comparison between the United States and Canada. The U.S. population is a lot bigger. We have about 318 million people, 317, whereas in Canada it only has about 36 million people, so that's about the equivalent to the size of California. The economy, ours of course, is a lot bigger. We're close to 19 trillion annually GDP, whereas in Canada is around 2 trillion, but that's still really good considering their population. And as far as our cities go, they pretty much look the same. So same kind of architecture and layout with cities and suburbs between U.S. and Canada. We trade with each other the most. So our number one trading partner is Canada, and of course their number one is us. And just to give you an idea, over 1 million jobs would be lost if we stopped trading with Canada immediately. So there's a lot of connection between the two. Some things we have in common: we're both British colonies. Of course, we fought for our independence. Canada was granted to them in 1980. We're both federations. This means that our federal government, our national government, is strong with weaker state governments. And then we both have representative democracies. Now they have a parliamentary system with a prime minister, and I'll get into that later and what that means. But for now, just know that it's a similar system. We have the longest unfortified border in the world. What this means is it's not like guarded, as in, there's not a wall there, there's not military, anything like that between the two countries, because we're both wealthy nations. So it's not like people are sneaking across the border to get to Canada or vice versa. And then we are a superpower. Canada is not. Canada is powerful, but they're not a superpower. What superpower means is that we have the strongest economy, military, and government in the world. So we are it as far as being the most powerful country. So a lot of times countries in the Americas, including Canada, rely more on our strength to defend this half of the world. All right, and our population pyramids. So again, of course, you can see this is back in 2000, but you can see obviously our population is a lot bigger. So this is the baby boom here. Of course, this is 16 years later now. So now the baby boom they're more up in this area. They're getting older and retiring. And our younger population is less than the baby boom generation. Canada, they're, of course, a smaller population, but they do live a little bit longer. Can't really tell on here, but they do live a little bit longer than Americans. But it's pretty equivalent. All right, now looking at the U.S., the physical geography of the U.S. So we're about half the size of Russia, a third the size of Africa, so we fit like inside the Sahara Desert, half the size of South America, and we're 2.5 times bigger than Western Europe. So we're the third largest country in the world in both population and land size. So land size, Russia's the biggest, then Canada second, and then we are third. And of course, China and India beat us on population. All right, and then getting into landforms. So, what you need to know when it comes to physical geography is how these landforms affect the development of the United States. We'll get into how it affects, how it affected our history, but also how it affects our economic activities, where people live, how the problems we've had to overcome, and stuff like that. So right here where it says continent, what that's referring to is the fact that we're a continental country. So we span all the way east and west across the North American continent. And because of that, we're going to have different problems that we face compared to smaller countries like Italy or France. Connectivity problems, how to connect the country all the way across. So we built the railroad in the 1800s to do that. And then eventually the highway system, and then obviously airplanes helped. So that was a big problem. And it's also hard for the government to control such a big area. How is Washington, D.C. going to enforce laws in California or Colorado, stuff like that when it's so far away? So those are some issues you have to deal with being a large country. And then we got two mountain ranges, two major ones. You got the Rockies on the west side, going through Colorado up through Canada, and then the Appalachians on the east side. The Appalachians is an older chain, and we know that because it's been eroded. They're smaller mountains, and they're more rounded off, whereas in the Rockies are tall and jagged. So the Rockies are definitely a bigger barrier to overcome, but still, mountains are mountains, and they're barriers no matter what. All right, the Continental Divide. You need to know what happens along here. So basically, this is the highest point of the North American continent. So if you were looking at the continent from a side profile, everything goes up to that point. So that's the highest point. And so the divide is at the top of that point. It goes right along the highest peaks of the mountains of the Rockies. And so if you were to spill water on this side, or if it were to rain on this side of the Rocky Mountains, then all the water is going to flow down into the Pacific Ocean. As you can see on the map. Whereas if it rains on this side, then it's going to flow down to the Mississippi River and then into the Gulf of Mexico. Or if it's further over to the east, it'll just go straight into the Atlantic Ocean. So this just dictates where water flows. And then the Great Plains. So the Great Plains lead up to the Rocky Mountains. It's kind of like a tabletop. So elevation goes up as you get up to the Rockies, then it kind of comes up to a table, and then you hit the Rocky Mountains. So the Great Plains, you need to know what economic activity would occur here, and today it's farming. This is where we grow the most wheat. So this is the bread basket of planet Earth. Like, we provide a lot of the bread for most of the world in this region. This is the largest plains region anywhere on the Earth. This extends into Canada as well. So the Rocky Mountains extend into Canada. The Great Plains extend into Canada. So here's a great place for farming. And then you get into why we're agricultural and industrial leaders. Well, obviously agricultural because of the land we have to farm on. We have the Great Plains. But as far as, why we're able to trade so much and make so much money, we have access to both oceans, the Atlantic and Pacific. I say both, like there's more than two oceans. But we have access to both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which really, we're kind of in the middle of everything. So we can trade with Europe and then Africa, and then we also trade with Japan and China and Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand. We're kind of right there in the middle, and so it allows us access to all those markets. And then transportation, we have great infrastructure. So the highway system, so we can transport goods, railway system, obviously airports, ports. We got tons of port cities. And so our infrastructure is very strong, very advanced, and so that allows our economy to be advanced. And then we have a lot of hydroelectric power, so clean energy, especially like in the desert Southwest with like the Hoover Dam, produces a lot of clean energy. And then the Rocky Mountains, from there we get copper, gold, uranium, silver, things like that we're able to get from the Rockies. So here you can see different economic activities throughout the U.S. Of course, Texas, we're big in oil, natural gas, things like that. And then, of course, livestock raising and commercial farming, like where we are. So we've got a lot going on here. All right, now moving into climate, you need to know different types of climate that we have in the U.S. and what affects it. Obviously, latitudes. The further north you go, it's going to get colder, as you can see on this map over here. Nearness to the ocean. You're closer to the ocean. Remember, the temperatures aren't going to swing that much. So if you're on the west coast, it's like San Francisco, L.A., stuff like that, you're going to have a cooler climate because that's a cold ocean current that goes along the west coast. And then rain shadow. Again, California, you got the mountains there, the Sierra Nevada mountains. As you pass over those mountains, you get into the desert, going into Nevada and things like that. That's the giant rain shadow there. And then that's just going back to ocean currents. The westerlies, that's the prevailing wind or the jet stream that comes from close to the equator, and it kind of swoops up from the west and goes to the east over the North American continent. So that brings warmer air to us, especially here in the south. And then it's drier in the central part of the continent due to continentality. So you see drier conditions, and of course that's where the temperature swing can get really big. So continentality is going to be really big, basically from Nebraska north into this area here. You're going to see big swings in temperature. Then of course on the Atlantic side we get hurricanes, and we'll get into those in a second. All right, so here's your different climate zones. You do need to know where we are. So we're humid subtropical. Usually in a humid subtropical climate, you're going to see a lot of farming, which is, of course, what you see throughout the South. That's what the South has always been known for, is farming. And then precipitation, again, heaviest mainly in the South. And it gets drier as you go west, and then you get your rain shadow in this area. And then, of course, you get tons of rain here. We actually have a rainforest in Washington. It's one of the only temperate rainforests in the world. But most of the rain is right there on the northwest coast or down here in the south. But I say down here, but more so Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama area. All right, now getting into different types of natural disasters we have in the country. So earthquakes, as you can see, earthquakes mainly affect the West for the most part. This is on the Ring of Fire, the San Andreas Fault in California, and then of course Alaska is also on the Ring of Fire, as you can see, all these earthquakes, and of course they have volcanoes as well. We also have volcanoes on the West Coast also, and you do see earthquakes throughout the country, but of course they're the heaviest on the west side. And then you also get hurricanes hit the East Coast and the Gulf Coast where we are. Or near, anyways. So just give you a couple examples of hurricanes. Hurricane Camille, this was a Category 5, it's one of the strongest ones of the 20th century. It killed 412 people. Category 5 is the largest one you can get, so you need to know hurricanes go on a scale of 1 to 5, so 5 is the biggest. And 5 it's like a very strong tornado. It can rip homes completely off their foundations and just destroy everything. Of course, the plus with hurricanes is that you have more of a warning, so you have time to get out and get away from the storm before it hits. Another example would be Hurricane Andrew. This was the most expensive hurricane so far, even more than Katrina. This one went right over downtown Miami, and this thing was big. It was a Category 5, killed 65 people, again, because people left, and they flee before, because this thing was huge. So they left, but $30 billion in damage from that storm. And so we do have a lot of large population centers on the East Coast, especially the Southeast Coast, and so hurricanes can get very expensive for our country. And then next natural disasters, tornadoes, which hit the middle central part of the country the most, kind of through this area and then in the south as well. And of course, remember, hurricanes can also produce tornadoes. So you see Texas has had the most tornadoes out of any state, but of course we're also the second largest state. So that's going to be a big reason why. But most of them hit in this area. You do need to know, again, tornadoes go on a scale of 1 to 5. We call it the Fujita scale, so it's F1 through F5. Technically, there's an F0, which is just like it's like a whirlwind, basically. But F1 through F5 is really how we rate them. And then you need to know what causes them. So basically what you have is more moist air from the Gulf of Mexico pushes north, so like where we are here. So we get all this warm, humid air from the Gulf of Mexico. And then a cold front comes in, maybe from the Rocky Mountains over here, or straight from Canada, and it swoops down. And when this cold air mass hits this warm air mass, then that air begins to circulate. It makes the atmosphere really unstable and can create tornadoes. And so that's why you mainly see it in this area, because it's this warm air mass from the Gulf hitting this cold air mass from the North Pole, creating that problem. All right, and then flooding. Flooding is mainly along the Mississippi River. So in '93, we had a huge flood along the Mississippi. You see St. Louis here. You see before the flood. During the flood, water's just everywhere. And then after, it's just mud and dirt and all that stuff. So flooding along Mississippi can be quite horrific, as we've also seen with hurricanes as well in Louisiana. All right, then human environment interaction, that's what HEI stands for. So when people first came over here thousands of years ago, they were nomads from East Asia and Siberia. They walked across what's called Beringia, which was a land bridge connecting the two continents back during the Ice Age. So they crossed over and then over a period of thousands of years spread out throughout the Americas. And of course they had to adapt to their environment depending on where they stayed. So, the food they ate and how they lived is all dictated by the environment they decided to settle in. And this, of course, affects us today, too, not just Native Americans. So if you look at how Montreal in Canada was built compared to Los Angeles in California, it's all dictated by weather. So LA has nice sunny weather. It's warm. And so the city is more spread out. It's not really condensed. It's all spread out. Plenty of areas where you can walk and stuff like that. You see outdoor parking and stuff. Montreal, though, gets incredibly cold. So cold that if you're outside for an extended period of time, if any skin is showing, you can get frostbite. So in the downtown area, they have tunnels, like underground areas that connect all the buildings together. So you can get on the subway and get out and then stay underground and get to your building and go to your office, or during your lunch break, you can go eat and go shop or whatever and stay in the building or underground all the time. So it's basically like an underground mall that connects it all together. So the environment obviously is going to dictate the way we build our cities, the way we live, things like that. All right, and then movement. So looking at how we move. So when first Americans came here, like colonists, and settled here, they needed rivers to transport goods on. So the main rivers that we can use in America for transportation is the Mississippi, the Ohio, and the St. Lawrence. And then, of course, we have the Great Lakes. But the problem is they never found a passage, going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So you can't just move stuff all the way across by boat. So all your early cities are pretty much along these rivers for trade routes or the Great Lakes. But eventually we built the Erie Canal. And the Erie Canal connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. So now boats can transport goods from Europe and get up through the Erie Canal, get into the Great Lakes, can go all the way into Chicago or Green Bay or something like that. But we have to use locks in order to do this because we're having to bring a boat, well, up in elevation. And of course, there's waterfalls and stuff like that along the way as you get closer to the Atlantic. So we have to put them in this like little lock. Basically, these two walls come up, and then they fill up with water and bring the boat up and move it to the next level. And then it has to go to another lock and does the same thing, fills up and brings it up to the next level to push it along, basically. So side profile is basically like this. Now, of course, it's not like there's one giant lock that lifts all this water up. There's a series of locks, like several locks, to slowly inch the boat from down here to up here. And of course, when they go down, they have to do the same thing. And then our rivers. So we do have a lot of rivers in the United States. This is all the river systems throughout the U.S. But the problem is most of these we can't use to navigate on. Most of them aren't deep enough for large ships to go up and down. So here are the only navigable river areas. So the Mississippi and some of the branches going into the Mississippi, Ohio, and St. Lawrence areas are the only ones we can really navigate on. So that's why early populations mainly stayed along here for the most part, because moving west, they just didn't have that option to navigate by river. All right, so that's it for presentation one, mainly just, again, going over physical geography and looking how it is we adapted to the environment. The next one will be over history and how that has impacted us.